Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Letters to Tahira. Tahira K. Nam Khatud. By G. A. Parwez. Translated by Mrs. Suraya Alvi. Chapter 4-5. Second wife. Fourth letter to Tahira. No, my dear girl, not like this. Sabira underwent the same thing that happened to that princess who was unpacking the magic needles. Do you remember that story, or have you forgotten it? As a child you used to love hearing that story. You used to hear those stories to go off to sleep, whereas now I want to tell you the same stories to wake you up. They are the same stories except that their purpose has been changed. This does not happen particularly to you. Even great nations undergo the same process. During their period of downfall, nations listen to the anecdotes of their past to be able to sleep. The sleep of death. And for awakened nations, the same stories wake them up to a new life. How a story affects, depends more on the listener rather than the story itself. Story of the Princess. As far as I remember, the story of the princess was like this. One day she found in her garden a Prince Charming, lying quite still and unconscious. The whole of his body had been pierced with pins. This scene frightened the princess. She was about to run away screaming when she heard a voice from somewhere, beckoning her not to feel afraid. The prince was under a magic spell, the voice told her. These needles could be removed from the body, one per day. When the last needle would come off, the prince would open his eyes and he will marry the first woman he sets his eyes on. The princess felt better and she started taking out those needles, one every day. It took her days, months, even years. But the princess, unmindful of everything in the world, kept on taking off those needles. Her advancing years were a source of apprehension for her parents and well-wishers. They were all accusing her of running after a mirage. But she would not listen to anyone, shunning all the luxuries of the world. She was following her craze of the prince and his needles. She kept working on it for 12 years. Now there were only a few needles left: 8, 6, 4, 2 and then 1. When the last needle was left, the princess's happiness knew no bounds. Her whole world was awakening. She was imagining how the prince would wake up smiling and how they would get married. How her dream of 12 years would come true. She thought she should don her bridal dress before she takes out the last needle. So she busied herself in getting ready. She had a maid who knew everything. The minute the princess turned her back, the maid guiltily took off the last needle. The removal of the last needle made the prince wake up smiling, and thanking the maid 1,000 times for his release, he took her away to get married. When the princess came back after having her bath and changing, she found the prince missing. She could not bear this shock and lost her mind. That maid became the princess and the mad princess started gleaning the cities and jungles for her prince. This was the story that your grandma used to tell to you before you went to sleep. And after hearing this story you used to remark angrily, if I could get hold of that maid, I will tie her to a tree and beat her black and blue until she releases the prince to the princess. Zaidi and Sabira. My daughter, the same thing happened to Sabira. Zaidi and Sabira were brought up in the same home. Zaidi lost his father in his childhood, and his father's brother accepted this orphan as his child. Sabira and Zaidi grew up together. Girls in general are more sensitive and delicate compared to boys, but Sabira in particular was more understanding and gentle. When she came to know that Zaidi was an orphan, she felt more sympathetic towards him. She would display her feelings by saving whatever fruit or sweet she got and giving it to him quietly on his return from school. In the same manner, whatever monetary gifts she would receive on Eid, she would give them to Zaidi. In childhood the motive for her innocent sympathies was that Zaidi did not have a father. Perhaps because of these sympathetic gestures, or maybe due to some unconscious sentiments, even Zaidi, in his heart, kept on becoming closer to Sabira. Until one day when he matriculated he whispered to his aunt, his wish of getting married to Sabira. Everybody in the family opposed this proposal tooth and nail, including Sabira's mother. Zaidi's widowed mother was very much in favor of this match, but her poverty and widowhood were blocking her way. She could not dare mention such a proposal. This friction remained in a family for some time, and Sabira remained silent. One day while talking to a neighbor, it slipped from Sabira's mother, how could she marry her daughter to a person who had been brought up on their charity? When Sabira heard this, she could not contain herself, and breaking the ice, she told her mother that it was no good that she hated an orphan. God ordains us to respect them. Now come what may, I am going to marry this poor orphan. Zaidi always used to say, that the best day in his life was when Sabira asserted her will in front of her mother. Therefore, they got married. Sabira's thriftiness. Sabira was a thrifty girl. In fact, a clerk lives from hand to mouth. Over and above themselves, it was his family of 2 brothers, a sister, and a widowed mother to be procured for, and a loan of his father to be paid. But Sabira managing the house so efficiently that nobody could guess that they were so poor. This management included quite a bit of sacrifice on the part of Sabira in favor of her husband and his family. Whenever she had some free time, she used to collect some sewing orders from the neighborhood, which used to supplement her income. Sabira had to work very hard, but she was happy to see her husband happy, and the thought of being able to look after and fully support a poor and needy family used to make her feel good. Zaidi was quite contented, but for a wish that he could get better education. When Sabira noticed her husband's chagrin, she started encouraging him. She first suggested that after office hours, he join some evening classes in a college. But to do this, Zaidi had to give up that tuition which he was giving for the last 1 year to earn 25 rupees. This idea was blocking Zaidi's way. Sabira solved this problem by herself, teaching 3 neighboring children in the evening for 30 rupees per month. Gradually Zaidi obtained his BA degree. After this he wanted to do his LLB degree to become a lawyer. For this he had to give up his job because in those days, there were no evening classes for law. Sacrifice and hard work. This stage was very difficult. In fact, it was rather impossible. But Sabira told Zaidi not to worry. If this is what you intend to do, then leave your job. I shall start teaching children during the day and work harder with my sewing. You continue your law education. I will look after myself and procure for your education too. So Zaidi joined law college, and Sabira surprised the world by putting her words into action and did exactly what she said she would do. She used to be so busy that on some days, she would only get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. She was working hard constantly, even with her little daughter in her lap. She had a lovely innocent little girl. Sabira constantly kept taking the needles off her prints. When Zaidi cleared his LLB, Sabira thought her ordeal would be over, too. She would have some respite. Working so hard for day and night had taken its toll on Sabira's health. But she did not care much for it. She was happy that her husband's wish had been fulfilled. And perhaps the subconscious feeling that she was fulfilling all the deprivations, which Zaidi had suffered because he was an orphan. Sabira could see that contentment still eluded Zaidi. There was something, which still troubled him. She tried asking him many times, but Zaidi brushed her inquiries away. At last one day, upon her insistence, Zaidi told her what he had been wishing since his childhood, that he would go abroad and become a barrister. He would then be a big leader. People would come to listen to his speeches and would take him out in processions. They would be cheering him heartily. Then I would become a member of the assembly and later a minister. But all these wishes seem to be destined to remain buried in my heart. I am not worried for my mother since she is living with the younger brother. I am worried on your account only. If you could fend for yourself, then I could go abroad for my higher education. But there seems to be no way out of this predicament. Sabira listened to all this very carefully, but did not reply. After 2 or 3 days she said to Zaidi, I have done some deliberation over this problem. Do not worry on my account. I can fend for myself and our daughter. You go ahead. May God fulfill your intentions. And it would be my pleasure to see your efforts bear fruit. The biggest hurdle is the fare to go abroad. Make my jewelry your stepping stone. And there is nothing else to worry about. Zaidi was stunned to hear this. His eyes were moist and he could not speak. He hugged Sabira and cried. When after a while he could control his emotions, he could only stammer and say, Sabira, you are an angel from heaven and not a woman. You should be adored. I did not deserve you. There is nobody on this earth luckier than I am who has got a wife like you. Whatever I am feeling, I do not know how to express it. Sabira, you really deserve all the adoration. All your life has been one of constant love and sacrifice, and I feel so ashamed that I have not been able to do much for you. Rather, I have been the cause of so much worry and discomfort to you. This was quite naive on my part to be wishing to go abroad. I know you'll have to undergo a lot of inconvenience for it. I do not want to trouble you anymore. I give up the idea of going abroad. This is no justice that I would have all my wishes fulfilled and you undergo a life of constant worry. No, Sabira, I cannot do that. Zaidi wanted to say something more, but Sabira cut him short by saying that if husband and wife, too, started thinking in terms of you and me, then where else would one get cordial relationship? You were the one to tell me that Nika literally means this kind of relationship, like sleep in the eyes. Therefore, why do you differentiate between discomfort and happiness between husband and wife? Fulfilling all your wishes is my pleasure. This is my decision that you must go abroad. Or rather, let us say now, it is my wish, which is necessary for you to fulfill. Meanwhile she heard the baby cry and Sabira went to her. A few days passed arguing about the issue. Zaidi would say he would not go and Sabira would insist that he should, until the day arrived when Sabira went to the station to see Zaidi off. He was crying already. When he picked up his daughter in his arms he started sobbing violently. Now Sabira, too, could not control herself and her cheeks were wet with warm tears. The train left and Sabira did not have even the fare money so that she could reach her parents' home. Zaidi noted all that in an article in a magazine published abroad. The heading of that article was unbelievable. Sabira went to a friend of hers, Parveen, to borrow some money so that she could reach her parents' place. Parveen, after hearing everything, smiled and casually said, "You should have gone along with Zaidi abroad yourself. Never trust these men. If he brought a ma'am from abroad, then what would you do?" Parveen said all that casually and in a joking manner, but Sabira felt like strangling her friend. She felt so bad. She controlled herself with difficulty and just said, "Parveen, you do not know how much you have insulted me by saying this. You did not understand. Whom were you talking about? You could not understand Nahid's father. You do not know how far above ordinary men he is. You do not know what he is. Parveen, come what may, he would not look at another woman in the whole world." Parveen felt sorry for having hurt her friend. Trials of Sabira. Sabira went to her father's house. He was a poor man and lived in a small town where Sabira could not get any children to teach or any tailoring assignments either. She was surrounded by misfortune, but she was not discouraged by them. Her hard work and intelligence came to her rescue and she kept fending for herself and for her daughter. Sometimes she was even able to send some gift to Zaidi. This hard work told upon her health, but if all this had any compensation, then that was her daughter's smiles and her husband's loving and thankful letters. So when she used to lie down at night, tired, she would hug her daughter and would start thinking of the easy life ahead. She would count the days after which Zaidi would come back. Then she used to weave her web of happiness and would imagine how heavenly it would be when he would come back. She would be able to gather all the happiness in the world along with her husband and daughter. There would be songs of joy on her lips. Her eyes used to get moist with such happy thoughts. And then would go off to sleep, enclosing her tears of joy within her eyelids as a pearl does in its chamber under the waves of the ocean, forgetting all the trials and tribulations of life. Sabira kept on taking out the needles from her prince's body until just a few were left. As these needles kept on becoming less and less, they brought back the freshness on Sabira's face. Now there were a few months left for Zaidi's return. But Sabira felt that just as she was becoming more enthusiastic about his coming back, his letters had become devoid of love and more mechanical, and their frequency became less than before. It had been a constant link before, and she, due to her preoccupation, had to excuse herself for not replying sooner. Now it was the other way round. Sabira had to complain for not getting a reply to all her letters. The needles were becoming less and less, but Sabira's heart had been pounding quicker than before. She could not understand the reason for this change. Sometimes she would have apprehensive and eerie ideas, but then she would brush them off as superstitions. She would ask Zaidi about the date of his coming back, but he would beat about the bush. And the estimated date of return passed and Zaidi did not come. Now Sabira became tongue-tied. Many weeks passed. It had been so many days since she had heard from Zaidi. One day Sabira was sitting quietly, thinking about this, when the postman called. Sabira eagerly went to the front door and took the letter. It was of foreign mail. She opened it hurriedly only to find a newspaper cutting inside the envelope. It was a photograph of Zaidi, along with a young girl, and the caption read, "This newly married couple is proceeding to Switzerland for their honeymoon." Sabira staggered and fell down. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital. The doctor motioned the nurse to show her Nahid. Sabira patted her daughter's head and said in a stammer, "My dear, I still have to live for you." And she fainted again. After a few days the hard-boiled Sabira came home. She did not write anything to Zaidi. Neither did he write any letter. However, Sabira's old father wrote a letter to Zaidi. In reply to that he wrote back, "I do not know what crime I have committed to deserve this dressing down which I am getting. When religious law allows it, then who are you to be objecting to it? I care for Sabira more than you. I am responsible for them morally and religiously. I am not a mean person that I shall be evading my responsibilities. I am a gentleman and I intend fulfilling my obligations like a gentleman. Sabira can live wherever she feels happy. Her happiness would be my happiness. I will keep on sending her maintenance. If she wants to follow another path for her life, even then I would not be a stumbling block. I have already said that her happiness makes me happy, too." When Sabira's father replied this letter, Zaidi's next letter contained a divorce for Sabira. "Dear Tahira, take heart, and wipe off your tears and read the whole letter. Look at me. How do I start relating these stories to you, with a heavy heart? Either do not ask me to tell you such harrowing stories, or if you do ask, then have a heart to be able to listen to such tales of woe. Now Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed Zaidi, Barat Law, is leading a gilt-edged life. A palace to live in. A car. Servants. Separate servant and nurses for the madam. Nanny for children. He has attained a high status in modern society because both husband and wife are quite social. They are known in the clubs. Newspapers take a note of them, too. Now he is thinking of becoming a leader. Since it is easier to become a leader through religion, Mr. Zaidi is advising the nation to become true and real Muslims. He delivers emotional speeches about Islam. He writes lengthy articles in which he tries to depict the true picture of Islam. He is about to become a leader, and you know that a ministry is 2 steps away. Sabira's condition. He is leading this kind of posh life, and poor Sabira, on the other hand, is marking time on her life in her parents' home. Nobody has ever heard her talk about this topic. But we have heard that when Nahid pesters her for a story at night, then she relates the story of the prince with needles, whereupon Nahid goes off to sleep. But Sabira keeps on laughing her crazy laughter. Sometimes she automatically utters words such as religious law, morality, gentle manliness, responsibility, and then laughs out so loudly that it sometimes wakes up the people at home. Then her old father comes and says only this, "Dear Sabira, take heart. You said you would live for Nahid." This brings Sabira to tears, tears that are wiped by Mary's cloak, and then Sabira goes off to sleep. Who is the culprit? I agree with you, Tahira. Here Zaidi is not the only culprit. The bigger culprit is our society, which not only recognizes such culprits, but gives them a high status. Whereas these people should not be allowed to come near decent people. The humanitarian level is far too high. But if viewed from even a very mundane level, it would be quite clear that if, for his ordinary wishes, a person can betray a wife like Sabira, could he be trusted in other matters? But our society is at fault. If our society could focus on the correct angle, then these type of wolves in lamb's clothing could be chastised in no time. But Tahira, I want you to attend to another aspect. Leave alone Zaidi and the society. What would you say about that, the woman who knowingly destroyed a home? She knew everything, still she destroyed a member of her own sex. If only she would have cared a little bit, Zaidi could not indulge in such an annoying act in humanity. Whereas our society is raising Zaidi on a high pedestal, our women of high society are. In whose predicament you remain so gloomy? Accepting Mrs. Zaidi like a sacred idol. What do you think of them? Therefore, my daughter, everything here is chaotic. And women all riding the same boat. Thank goodness, Salim came back safely, otherwise if he, too, would have quoted the religious laws, saying that the Shariat permits it, then what could I or you have done? This dagger is not only on people going abroad, here, too, it keeps on dangling. Which area can boast of not having a house dismantled this way? Which lane does not hear the sobs and sighs of people like Sabira? These sighs could belong to those who have been divorced or those who had to put up with the usurpers. My dear daughter, I keep on praying for you. And for daughters like you. For the stability of your marriage. May you and your children and your grandchildren prosper. May you be happy and may your homes be safe from any kind of disintegration. I cannot do anything more than praying, although I know that such chaotic society cannot be set right with prayers or good wishes only. Its remedy could only be effected if it could be reconstructed on purely Quranic lines. God be with you. Parwez, April 1954. Incompatible marriages. Fifth letter to Tahira. Yes, my daughter, you have understood the meaning of moda. Affection. Correctly. In the Dark Ages, Arabs used to bury their daughters alive. The Quran came to eradicate all kinds of cruelty, discrimination, and exploitation. Therefore, it is impossible to believe that such a barbaric custom has survived. Custom of female infanticide. The custom was forbidden, and it took a few years for this barbaric and soul-searing custom to be eradicated from this world completely. The Quran has mentioned in its typical attractive and logical style that when that innocent girl would present her case before God against her murderer, the father, then the criminal would be asked as to what crime this helpless innocent life had committed for which he, the killer, had been so cruel to her. What answer will he have? It is so obvious. Muslims are happy that, by the grace of God, this earth-shaking barbaric custom came to an end. It is worth celebrating. But Tahira, if you look a bit deeper, you will see that this beastly and inhuman custom still prevails in the world. Perhaps you will wonder as to which lawless land can still practice such a degrading custom, during this age of civilization, culture, and enlightenment. A custom in which people still bury their daughters alive. But you will be extremely amazed when you are told that this heart-rending custom is actually being practiced in our country, by our nation and in our homes. We see this high-handedness, and do not feel for it at all. We ignore references to this custom in the Quran, by saying that it is about dark period of the Arabs that this horrible custom refers to, and that it has nothing to do with us. Custom is still alive. Tahira, you know that the Quran considers every unjustified murder to be the worst crime. But this type of murder, burying girls alive, is most horrible and barbaric because it involves a helpless baby, too young and unable of defending herself, and this makes it most unjustified murder. Just look around you and see how many such murders are committed right in front of your eyes. Moreover, the murderer goes about blatantly and displaying the blood on his sleeves, and none of the minnows of law and order can apprehend him. Tahira, I can well imagine the torment your heart might be passing through after reading the above line. And I can well imagine your inquisitive eye looking in vain for signs of such unjustified murder. But I really wonder whether your searching eye, looking far and wide, noticing this little baby Zubaydah who has been deprived of her mother and is now being reared by her maternal grandmother. Perhaps, you have not seen her deceased mother, or you do not know how she died. Waywardness of Rashid. You may not even know that this girl is the daughter of Rashid, who was arrested and imprisoned the other day from his gambling den. Rashid's waywardness is not new. He has been like that since his childhood. He was still small when his father died. In a nation that has lost its collective life, its orphans either starve to death, or if they are well provided for at home but are without the guidance of a proper guardian, they become wayward and insolent. It is a great achievement to be able to display real good character while having led the life as an orphan. As a child, Rashid was the apple of his mother's eye, but, as he grew up, he started keeping bad company. His waywardness was no secret. Sometimes some elder members of the family would chastise him. But it was not really like the concern of a real father who, even if his child was being insolent or rude, would still do not give up worrying about its welfare. Mother used to simmer with anguish, but who would listen to her? Shakira's mother. Rashid was a worthless vagrant, and nobody liked him. But God knows what came into Shakira's mother's head, that she insisted on giving her daughter's hand in marriage to Rashid. Their family opposed it. Relatives and near and dear ones were all against it. And the neighbors and residents of the area, in fact anybody who heard about it, opposed it. But she turned a deaf ear to everybody. Leave alone everybody else, even Rashid opposed this proposal. But Rashid's and Shakira's mothers were in favor of it. If ever anybody would question Shakira's mother, she would bluntly reply that, I had given my daughter to my sister, when my baby was still a suckling. Now I shall either send her in a palanquin to my sister's house, or her coffin would depart from my threshold. Shakira was a serious, quiet, understanding, and a sensitive girl. According to the restrictions of our present society, a girl's expression of an opinion about her proposal is considered such a great sin, that there is no atonement for it. Furthermore, Shakira has a taciturn disposition, but sometimes it used to be hinted by her friends and well-wishers that she foresaw the dark future, and that her mother's insistence was her death knell. Her last ray of hope was that Rashid himself was against this proposal. This might save her from hell. Wedding. But then it was the obstinacy of Rashid's mother. If you oppose me, son, I shall take poison and commit suicide. I have given word to my sister and now I cannot back out of it, she insisted. The result was that they fixed a date, the marriage party came and all the rituals were performed. At the end, just before the send-off, they thought of another custom. The registrar of marriage contracts, the witnesses, and even the bridegroom, all knew about how both of them had been brought together unwillingly. But because of the fear of the groom's mother's annoyance, the bride's social stigma, the witness's integrity and the priest's greed for his fee, nothing was considered amiss in the will of God and the Nabi's sunnah. The marriage ceremony was performed. The relevant sermon was delivered. People offered lengthy supplications. Trumpets were blared, congratulations were bestowed. The bride was brought home, which was suitably adorned. Tahira, just ponder on that relationship of matrimony. Nikah, which Quran calls a solemn covenant. 4:21. and the prime condition for which is that both parties execute it willingly. Only pondering over all its aspects, should anything be decided for the future. But performing it the way it was performed for Shakira is openly ridiculing the divine law. Now we treat matrimony as a trivial custom, and the priest recites a few memorized verses meant for such an occasion. Even, if they take those verses seriously, they would discover many a marital bliss in them. But talk about matrimony only, the whole of din has become a lifeless ritual to us. Anyway, this was how Shakira started her married life. She reached her in-laws' place. Nothing special happened, and time passed. But it could be seen that rosy Shakira was gradually turning into an autumn leaf. Although she tried her best to tactfully prevent Rashid from his misdeeds, by covering up, or by serving him well, or by many sacrifices, Rashid was a gone case. In the beginning it was indifference which gradually turned into hate and then enmity. At home she had the solace of her mother-in-law's company, but adversity does not strike alone. In less than a year Rashid's mother passed away. Now Shakira became more helpless and Rashid more dauntless. He frequented the house less and less, and mostly would remain out. Shakira's jewelry was the only attraction for him at home. Whenever he needed them, he would come to snatch them away. Shakira's simple father was a poor man, and although he could have afforded a few morsels for his daughter, Shakira was a thankful person and literally lived up to her name. She would never let anybody know that she was starving. Her parents' house was just next door, but she would not let them know about her toils. Quietly she tried her hand at earning something, but there could never be a stable means of livelihood for a tormented girl. She had to work extremely hard to earn a pittance. By the grace of God the whole locality knew her and they were all in fact her near relatives. She used to see all the goodies coming to other houses, but she never manifested any discontentment. Many a time it happened that as she was about to her first meal of the day, Rashid gate crashed from somewhere and Shakira would quietly put that meal in front of him. He had his meal and went out grumbling. One never knows, he might be beating her, taking with him whatever he saw in the house worth taking. As I have mentioned, the whole of that locality consisted of her relations. But, Tahira, this is the biggest curse of an individualistic lifestyle. In times of need you are alone. As you have seen, Shakira's poor father was a simple man. All he could do as a last resort was to implore Rashid and to serve him to the best of his capacity. But this kind of sacrifice is appreciated only where there is a fraction of humanity left. But Rashid used to receive all these gestures of goodwill from his poor in-laws as his right, and expected them to feel obliged. Despite all this Shakira never complained. The agony took its toll but she never let anybody know. She would cry when alone, but nobody ever saw her eyes moist. Her condition became known when her constant crying affected her eyesight. Her eyes ached for 2 months. When she was slightly better, it was discovered that her eyesight had become quite weak. Now she could not do any of those things through which she previously used to earn money. Whatever was in the house was gradually taken by Rashid. Finally Shakira could not hide her malady. She had become skin and bones. Her friends would suggest that it was no use worrying, because worrying would not help. She would hear them and smile, and you could see every pain written in her eyes in bold letters. She would become quiet, and her condition kept on deteriorating day by day. Rashid could not care less that a precious life was dwindling. Goodness knows since when she was having fever, but she never told anybody. When it became constant, it was discovered that she was suffering from chronic fever. It was winter and on one cold evening, somebody mentioned that police had arrested Rashid on some vagrancy charges, and that they were not letting him off because he could not pay the required 10 rupees. Shakira was wearing a woolen shawl, her last asset and her lifeline. She got up quietly and sent it to neighbor for it to be sold. Although it was a fine shawl, she could hardly get 10 rupees for it. She took the money and gave it to Rashid's uncle to pay the fine. Now she could not even protect herself against cold. Fever persisted and her life was like a lamp on its last flicker. With difficulty, her mother brought Shakira to her house and whatever treatment she could afford, was being given to her daughter. Shakira had become all the more quiet. When she saw her parents struggling for medicines or resorting to prayers for her well-being, she would ask a friend of hers to tell parents not to resort to any treatment, and to let her die. Eternal silence. Rashid never turned up, even by chance, to inquire about her welfare. Then one day he did come and sat near Shakira's bedhead. She looked up, raising her eyelashes, saw Rashid and smiled. The same smile that would reveal the depth of her heart on seeing every new trouble, and which was like a surgeon's knife cutting through all our man-made laws and restrictions. A tear came to her eyes, her eyelashes became moist and a hiccup broke the last lifeline. And Shakira, the picture of quiet anguish, was eternally silenced. Dear Tahira, just think, can there be any instances more distressing and inhuman than this? Just ponder how many such innocent lives are wasted because of this repression. And your society does not bat an eye for them. Tahira, you will say that corrective measures are being adopted to ameliorate such cruelties. Last year a law for the right of women to divorce was promulgated, to remedy such obstacles. There is no doubt about the good intention of such corrective suggestions. But what generally happens is that such corrective measures, instead of being beneficial for genuine cases, become manipulative tools in the hands of fraudulent people and as such defeat their purpose. Instead of eradicating the cases of evil, our corrective steps get bogged down and meet with little success. Reformation. It is no use applying ointment to the eruptions and boils of a patient whose blood is contaminated. One eruption would be cured but two more would surface elsewhere. The real remedy would be to purify the blood. Today the whole structure of our society is disintegrating. Therefore the real remedy would be its reformation and reconstruction from scratch. The foundations of such new construction should not be laid merely on the letter of the law, but on spirit of the law, too. Unless and until one adheres to the spirit of the law there could be no change in people's hearts and minds. No aspect of society could be reformed because the change depends upon the change in minds and hearts of the people. This change is not possible unless and until man-made laws are replaced by divine laws. God be with you. Parwez, June 1954. Talu Islam Trust. 25B, Gulberg 2. Lahore, Pakistan. taluiislam@gmail.com